Welcome, fellow historians, to a journey beyond the known chronicles of the Imperium. We often speak of Paul Atreides, the rise of the God Emperor, and the scattering. The forgotten lore, decipher the cryptic symbols, and piece together the epic sagas that shaped humanity's destiny among the stars. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss our first expedition into the deep past. The spice isn't the only treasure Arrakis holds.
In those days, no banners were raised, no fleets burned in the open sky, and yet an entire empire bled. So the chronicles say the spice wars never happened, because the dead left no graves, only empty ledgers, only silent markets, only planets that starved without ever being invaded. Spice was not seized with swords. It was strangled with contracts, measured in delays, hidden in quotas, and rationed until kings begged like addicts. Here is a heresy history prefers to forget. The greatest war in the Imperium was not fought with armies, but with access. Who breathes tomorrow, who navigates the stars, who lives long enough to rule. And the question the Imperium never answered was this: who truly controlled the spice? And what were they willing to let die to keep it that way? In those days, power no longer marched beneath flags. It flowed through supply chains, through silence, through the invisible veins of commerce that fed the Imperium's lungs. The Imperium told itself a comforting story. Those wars were loud. That violence announced itself with fire and orbitals. That peace existed wherever armies slept. But the truth is harsher. Peace was only the absence of noise. And silence was where the real killing happened. Melange was life, not metaphorically, literally. Without spice, the guild went blind. Without spice, emperors aged. Without spice, prophecy collapsed into mortality. So every promise of stability rested on a single grain of sand. Arrakis was not merely a planet. It was a choke point, a pressure valve, a god disguised as a desert. This chronicle is not about soldiers or heroes. It is about ledgers soaked in blood, about embargoes that replaced executions, about how control of spice became the most efficient weapon ever devised, one that killed slowly enough to be called governance. And the question that haunts these records is not who fought. It is something far more unsettling. When survival itself becomes commodity, can any empire remain innocent? In those days, before the World War learned to whisper, the Imperium believed itself eternal. Its maps were clean. Its borders are stable. Its violence ritualized. House fought house in formal duels of annihilation, contained and ceremonial, like predators taught where not to bite. But beneath this ordered cruelty, something older was shifting. Something quiet was learning how to kill without being seen. And no one was listening yet. So the chronicles say Arrakis was always cursing. A planet of thirst. A world that punished the living simply for existing. Sand that stripped flesh. Sunlight that flayed the soul. Worms that rose like gods in the deep. But that is not why Arrakis matters. That is only the costume history prefers. The truth is simpler and far more dangerous. Arrakis mattered because nothing else could replace it. Melange was not merely rare. It was singular. There was no substitute, no synthetic echo, no hidden reserve waiting in another system. One planet, one source, one dependency shared by every power structure that claims sovereignty over humanity. And when survival narrows to a single supply line, conflict stops being dramatic and starts being inevitable. The Guild discovered this first. They were the quiet gods of transit, their navigators bloated and blind, floating in orange gas like prophets drowning in their own visions. They did not rule openly. They did not command armies. They simply decided who arrived and who never did. Without spice, their prescience collapsed. Without prescience, interstellar civilizations shattered into isolation and darkness. So the Guild learned to fear interruption more than rebellion. And fear, when refined, becomes policy. The Bene Gesserit understood it next. They tasted the future in bloodlines and whispers, seeing history not as a line, but as a loom. To them, spice was memory made liquid, the key that unlocked ancestral voices, the fuel of their long breeding dream. They did not need vast quantities. They needed certainty, and certainty, like prophecy, cannot survive scarcity. So they watched Arrakis with eyes trained to notice absence, not presence. Then there was the Emperor, Shaddam IV, seated upon a throne that looked solid only because it had not yet cracked. His authority rested on balance, on houses, evenly afraid of one another, on the illusion that he stood above dependency. But even emperors age. Even emperors require spice. And the moment he realized his lifespan could be negotiated through supply, the throne became leverage, and leverage invites pressure. House Carino did not control Arrakis directly for a reason. To hold the source openly would expose a lie of neutrality. Instead, they delegated, outsourced brutality, installed stewards who could be blamed, replaced, erased. First, the Harkonnens, masters of excess, perfect villains for an empire that wanted cruelty to look accidental. They squeezed Arrakis loudly. Taxes, quotas, punishment made visible. And while the Imperium condemned them publicly, it profited privately. But visible violence creates resistance. Fear that can be named can be challenged. And the Harkonnens, in their greed, forgot the first rule of power. If they know you are killing them, they will eventually fight back. So the Imperium learned, and it refined its methods. The true origins of the Spice War were not in battles, but in accounting, in subtle reductions, in temporary delays blamed on storms, in revised estimates that always fell short, a percentage here, a shipment there, never enough to cause revolt, always enough to cause dependence. This was not a conquest, it was calibration. Economic violence does not announce itself. It starves futures before it starves bodies. It kills possibilities first. A house cannot plan a rebellion if it cannot afford navigators. A planet cannot resist if its trade lanes quietly dry up. A ruler cannot challenge a throne if his lifespan suddenly shortens. And so obedience became cheaper than resistance. So the chronicles insist there was peace, because no capital was burned, no fleet engagement scarred the stars, but in truth, an invisible battlefield had already formed. Arrakis at its center, spice is the ammunition, and survival itself is the prize. And as the Imperium congratulated itself on stability, one unspoken question lingered in the dust. How long can an empire survive when every breath it takes is rationed by those it pretends do not rule? And then the tone shifted, not with thunder, with hesitation. In those days, the Imperium began to feel a tremor it could not locate. Spice still flowed, ships still traveled, courts still convened beneath gold and silk. But something was wrong. Not absent, constrained, like breath drawn shallow by habit rather than choice. This was the Hidden War's first success, to make deprivation feel natural. The Guild felt it in their visions. Paths once bright grew cloudy. Probable futures narrowed like corridors collapsing inward. Navigation remained possible, but only barely. And in prescience, barely is terror. For the Guild did not fear death, they feared uncertainty. A future unseen is indistinguishable from annihilation, so they demanded guarantees. Long-term spice assurances, priority shipments, private stockpiles, and in doing so, they revealed the paradox at the heart of their power. They controlled all movement, yet they depended absolutely on what they could not produce. A god that must beg is no god at all, only a hostage with privileges. The Bene Gesserit watched this unfold in silence. They always did. Their Reverend Mother sensed instability not as panic, but as misalignment, bloodlines slipping. Timelines are bending too sharply. Spice access mattered less than in volume and more in continuity. Interruptions fractured memory, and fractured memory threatened their long design. So they intervened, not with force, but with influence. A word placed here, a marriage was delayed there, a prophecy adjusted subtly to steer demand away from panic. They did not seek to end the conflict. They sought to outlast it, for the sisterhood understood something others did not. Wars end, dependencies do not, but it was the Emperor who stood at the center of the storm, pretending it was only wind. Shaddam IV felt the pressure everywhere at once. Noble houses demanded stability. The Guild demanded assurance. The The Bene Gesserit demanded patience, and Arrakis demanded nothing at all. The desert does not negotiate, it simply waits. Spice scarcity became political gravity. Every decision bent toward it, raised production too much, and prices collapse, weakening control, restricted too sharply, and panic ignites rebellion. This was no longer administration. It was tightrope walking above extinction. And here the central conflict revealed itself. Not house versus house, not emperor versus rebel, but control versus continuity. Who gets enough spice to survive, and who gets just a little enough to remain obedient? The Harkonnens, sensing opportunity, pushed harder. They understood pain. They understood excess. They believed fear, intensified, would restore dominance. More pressure, more quotas, more punishment. But the desert answered with worms. The freemen answered with silence. And silence in war is never empty, because the freemen were not merely inhabitants. They were an anomaly that the ledgers could not calculate. They consumed spice casually, ritually, in quantities that would bankrupt the house. And yet, they thrived. Long life, heightened awareness, cultural cohesion forged by scarcity turned sacred. To the Imperium, this was impossible. To the Guild, alarming. To the Bene Gesserit, revelatory. A population saturated in spice, independent of off-world supply, invisible to economic pressure. This was not a resource problem. It was a theological one. If spice created dependency, then what did it mean when an entire people mastered it? And here the hidden war sharpened into a blade, because the true fear was no longer shortage. It was precedent. If Arrakis could sustain a society beyond imperial leverage, then the monopoly was a lie, and lies, once exposed, do not negotiate. So the Imperium doubled down, not publicly, quietly. Freemen were dismissed as primitives, population numbers minimized, ecological reports buried. Anything that suggested autonomy was erased from official truth, because empires can survive rebellion. They cannot survive alternatives. And then came the Atreides, not as conquerors, not as reformers, but as a variable the system had not accounted for. A house that believed in legitimacy, in stewardship, in the dangerous idea that power could be exercised without cruelty. The moment Duke Leto spoke of fair spice production, the war entered its final phase, because he threatened something far more valuable than spice. He threatened the method. If Arrakis could be governed without economic strangulation, then the hidden war would become visible. And visibility is fatal to those who rule through silence. So the knife was drawn, not against the Atreides alone, but against the possibility that control could exist without deprivation. And as plots tightened, shipments shifted, and futures narrowed. One unbearable truth pressed against the Imperium's throat. If the spice war was exposed, would the Empire collapse from rebellion, or from the revelation that it had always been starving its own future? And so the chronicle slows, not because the danger has passed, but because understanding always arrives after the damage is done. In those days, long after the ledgers were burned and the banners rewritten, historians asked the wrong question. They asked who won, but the spice war was never designed to be won. It was designed to be maintained, a system of tension calibrated so precisely that collapse and obedience became indistinguishable. Frank Herbert understood this with unsettling clarity. He did not write about empires that ruled through strength. He wrote about systems that rule through necessity, because the most efficient tyrannies do not demand loyalty. They demand survival. The Spice War reveals Herbert's central warning. When a civilization builds itself upon a single irreplaceable resource, politics ceases to be moral. It becomes logistical. Right and wrong dissolve into supply and delay. Ethics are postponed until the next shipment arrives. This is why the war had no front lines, because the battlefield was the human nervous system itself. Addiction scaled up the civilization. Spice extended life, expanded vision, unlocked future, but it also narrowed the choice. To need spice was to surrender agency. And when agency is surrendered collectively, consent becomes theater. Here the paradox sharpens. The Imperium believed spice granted control. In truth, spice revealed vulnerability. Every faction that relied on it became governable, predictable, blackmailable by scarcity. Power flowed not to those who possessed force, but to those who managed access. This is a machine Herbert builds. A political economy where violence is abstracted into policy, where no one pulls the trigger. Yet everyone bleeds time, possibility, and future. And the most damning truth is this: no one involved could opt out. The Guild could not abandon spice without ending civilization. The Emperor could not share control without ending his reign. The Bene Gesserit could not disrupt the flow without shattering their breeding program. Even the Harkonnens were trapped. Their cruelty was merely the visible symptom of a system that demanded pressure to function. So responsibility dissolved into structure, and structure became destiny. This is why Herbert introduces the Freeman as a philosophical counterweight. They do not merely resist imperial control. They expose its illusion. A society adapted to abundance rather than addicted to rationing, where spice is sacred, but not centralized. Ritual, not monopoly. Culture, not commodity. The Freemen are dangerous not because they fight well, but because they prove an alternative exists. And alternatives are the true enemies of empire. This is where modern echoes grow uncomfortable, because the spice war is not science fiction. It is a mirror, energy, data, food, medicine, algorithms that decide who is seen and who is invisible. Supply chains stretch so thin that a single interruption can starve nations. Herbert asks a question our own age avoids. At what point does management become domination? When access to survival is mediated by systems too complex to challenge, rebellion transforms into paperwork, resistance becomes debt, and violence is hidden behind compliance forms and delayed approvals. The most chilling lesson of the Spice War is not that empires exploit resources. It is that societies consent to exploitation when dependency feels safer than uncertainty. Better a slow suffocation you understand than a freedom that might collapse everything you know. And then, Paul Atreides, not as a savior, not as a tyrant, but as a rupture. Paul does not end the Spice War. He makes it visible. By threatening to destroy spice entirely, he exposes a truth everyone feared but never named. The Empire survives not because spice exists, but because it is believed to be indispensable. The moment that belief wavers, the system panics. Gods beg, guilds kneel, and emperors discover how small they truly are. This is Herbert's final cruelty. Even liberation arrives through terror. Even justice demands hostage-taking. Because once a system is built on dependency, there's no clean way out. The Spice War teaches us this. Control hidden is control perfected. Violence delayed is violence normalized. And the most dangerous wars are the ones history insists never happened. So the chronicle ends not with victory, but with a whisper carried on desert wind. If survival itself can be weaponized, then how many empires are already at war without knowing it? In those days, when the dust finally settled, the Imperium called it stability. It always does. No statues were raised in the dead of the Spice War. No anniversaries marked its end. Because how do you commemorate a conflict that never officially existed? How do you mourn futures that were quietly postponed and erased? Arrakis remained. The spice continued to flow. And the machinery of empire adjusted its tone from pressure to reverence, as if naming the desert sacred could absolve centuries of strangulation. But the truth, recorded only in fractured chronicles, is this: the Imperium did not fall because of rebellion alone. It fell because its greatest weapon was exposed. The lie that survival must always be rationed. Once that lie cracked, every throne trembled. So remember this hidden war. Not for its tactics, not for its players, but for its lesson, that the most absolute power is never loud, that the deadliest violence wears the mask of administration, and that empires rarely collapse from attack. They collapse when people realize they were never free to begin with. Subscribe, and remember, history always repeats, even in the Imperium.